All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's public safety briefing led by Deputy Mayor for Public Safety Phil Banks. Following our last speaker, we will take a few on-topic questions from the media, followed by some questions that have been submitted by the public ahead of today's briefing. I would now like to turn it over to Deputy Mayor Phil Banks.
So good afternoon, and thank you for attending, and thank you for tuning in. Today, I think we have a lot of interesting topics and some very useful information. We're going to hear from our esteemed guests on the right side of me, at least most of them over here, about the building collapse that took place on Ann Street recently. And we are joined by Commissioner Isco from NYSEM, Commissioner Valenchek from the Department of Buildings, certainly someone who's not a stranger to New York City, the Deputy Commissioner for Enforcement, Joe Esposito, who's former Chief of Department for the NYPD and former NYSEM Commissioner. And certainly they had the engineer with him, who's probably the most important person here to give us an update on that. That's very important. And then we have back with us again, Jessica Tisch from the Department of Sanitation, the Commissioner, and she's going to be speaking about two initiatives that she's undertaking. So sanitation is not just about quote unquote, cleaning the streets, empty the trash. So you're going to see exactly how she's building that agency out and how we believe that it's going to be very beneficial for the city. And last and certainly not least, we have Commissioner Vasquez from the Department of Aging and the NYPD's Community Affairs Commissioner, Mark Stewart. And they're going to be talking about what we needed to do to protect one of our most vulnerable communities, and that is the community of the aging, and that how they are brought their services together and how we are looking to increase our layer of that protection. So I think we're going to have a really very interesting conversation here today. I think it's going to be some useful tips. So pointing to our first subject, for those of you who don't know, we had a building collapse on Ann Street in Lower Manhattan. Very, very dangerous situation. All of the agencies come together, FDNY, NYPD, Department of Buildings, NYSEM. But there's a quarterback, there's a person who coordinates all of that, and that is the responsibility of Commissioner Isco from NYSEM. And I'm going to now turn it over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Coach. Appreciate it, sir. So first off, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the victim who was fatally injured during Tuesday's parking garage collapse. Our hearts are with the family and loved ones as they mourn their loss. I'd also say to the family, Willis Moore, as we've been in the neighborhood, people all over that neighborhood have talked about the impact that he had on them, about how friendly he was, about moments they had with him. He was beloved in that community, and it is felt down there. He's also a member of the extended New York City family as a father of a member of service. And when we were down there, and that had become sort of apparent, Phil Banks and Commissioner Sewell made it a point to send the NYPD's ESU down specifically so that it was the NYPD who was doing the dignified transfer. And I think it just says something about the fact that we who work for the city, it is a family, and Willis Moore and his family are part of that family. So please accept our heartfelt condolences for your loss. The ongoing operation at 57 Ann Street is incredibly complex. It's also very, very dangerous and remains dangerous. This work is not possible without a true interagency effort. We're not rushing through this cleanup. I know that there's a lot of folks that are looking for more information, looking for information about vehicles, about getting back into specific buildings. What I can say is safety right now is our #1 priority. And we are working very hard right now to ensure the stability of the surrounding structures as we proceed with the demolition. This is also this is further complicated just by the number of vehicles that are in there. Those vehicles have gas, other fluids that can cause hazards. In addition to that, we have the added complexity of electric vehicles, which, as we've had briefings from the fire department, we know that there are all sorts of issues with electric vehicle batteries. For micromobility, that's one problem. When you're talking about large cars, it's also pretty significant issue that we need to deal with. I'll walk through briefly the timeline, and then we'll turn it over to our partners at Department of Buildings. So on Tuesday afternoon, parking garage at 57 Ann Street collapsed, fatally injuring 1 victim and injuring 5. A DOB inspection found that the roof, the 3rd floor, and the 2nd floor all collapsed into the footprint of the building. In addition, the rear wall of the building had partially collapsed, and the front wall of the building at that point in time was bulging. The parking garage was 3 stories with a cellar underneath. The DOB structural engineers determined that the parking garage was no longer structurally stable and in danger of further collapse. And then, as part of the ongoing demolition and vehicle remover, city contractors on the scene now have to work to temporarily brace the adjacent building's walls. There's essentially a party wall between 57 Ann Street and adjacent building that's owned by Pace University to make sure that that wall doesn't come down in the course of demolition. This work takes time, it's complicated, and it's also delayed our ability to continue the demolition and extraction of vehicles. For some history, a collapse of this magnitude is pretty rare across New York City. The closest recent parallel to this incident was a major building collapse that did not involve a fire or caused by construction work. Would be the building collapse in Carroll Gardens back in 2020, which was also during the height of COVID. In terms of some of the impacts, neighboring residents, as a result of this ongoing work and some inspections that need to go on, there are full vacate orders at 55 Ann Street, 49 Ann Street, 27 Beekman Street, 19 Beekman Street, and then partial vacate orders at 47 Ann Street, 33 Beekman Street. These vacate orders, I understand that they're an inconvenience, but they are issued in the interest of public safety, which is our #1 priority due to the immediate hazards of this building. If you've been displaced, I know many of the residents are currently being assisted by the Red Cross. If you need assistance, you can reach out to the Red Cross. Everyone has a roof over their heads and the resources that they need. As part of the ongoing demolition and vehicle removal operations, as I mentioned, we have a lot of folks working down there. It really is an incredible effort. We have HPD, DOB, Fire Department, NYPD, the MTA, all of them working in conjunction to make sure that we're doing this safely and responsibly. For those that had vehicles inside the garage, we advise you to contact your insurance company as quickly as possible. Once vehicles are matched with owners, and I want to stress that because of the complexity of this operation and some of the things that we talked about that we need to do in order to move forward with the demolition and extraction of vehicles, that this is going to take some time, but we will reach out to find times as we move these vehicles out of that location for you to possibly come and find things that you might want in your vehicles, and also to help you with the police report that we know that you're going to need for insurance claims. If your car was in the parking garage, you can also call 311 to give them your information, but we will also be reaching out to you. Anyone whose vehicle was on the street at the time and was moved to facilitate the operation, you should also call 311. And again, having mentioned the importance of public safety and how complex and dangerous this operation remains, I really just want to urge everybody's patience as we continue this cleanup process. Lastly, I'd like to turn it over to our friends from Department of Buildings to chat a little bit about the history of the building, and also to talk to us a little bit about what the licensing and procedures are for city garages.
Thank you, Commissioner Iskel. Good afternoon. I'm Kas Velyanchik, Acting Commissioner of the Department of Buildings. After collapse, we've been working on pulling archives records related to the building. And our records indicate the following: that the building was constructed in 1908, and in 1926, the building underwent an alteration, resulting in certificate of occupancy, indicating the use of the building as parking garage. In addition to this, in 1957, the building underwent additional alteration, resulting in updated certificate of occupancy, also indicating it was a garage. This certificate of occupancy remains in effect as of now. In addition, our records indicate there are 4 open ECB violations Out of 4 open ECB violations, 2 of them related to the defects of concrete. In addition, also, in response to those violations in 2009, owner hired engineer and filed application with Department of Building and obtained necessary permit to apply necessary repairs. The 4 open violations remains open as of now because of, in order to close the violation, the owner required to submit to us certificate of occupancy. But in fact, Department of Building visited the site and observed that repair were in progress. And in addition, our record indicated necessary permits were obtained, and after that, it was even renewed for additional year. Pertaining to the current condition, this garage was cited for inspection, required inspection, as a local law implemented a new building code in effect in January of 23. In fact, the local law was implemented ahead of the building code in January of 22, requiring the owners of parking garage to inspect their structure by the licensed professional engineer. And this garage, which is located in Community Board 1, was cited for inspection, which was due for submission by the end of this year. Unfortunately, we're not able to receive this report.
So next, I just wanted us to hear from Commissioner Esposito, who has as much experience as anyone here in emergency management and just taking control over the scene. So Joe, if you can you just explain briefly, like, 1, how many levels was the building? And 2, the call goes in, all of the agencies come down. Just kind of paint a picture to general audience, what actually goes into effect to be able to get to the point where we're at today.
After the collapse?
Yes.
Yeah, so what happened was, which is 4 levels, you had SUVs on the roof level, close to 50 SUVs on the level. What caused the collapse, we don't know yet. That's investigation. Our engineers will be in there. They'll be making observations, working with other agencies to see how we can determine what exactly did happen. But when that incident like happens, again, emergency management is the person that's going to coordinate the response. Being that it's a collapse without an explosion, without a terrorist attack, it really is the FD that is the primary lead on it. They come in and everyone else supports them in their effort. And I must say, we were there in a matter of a few minutes, and the coordination between all the agencies was really, really well done. And it continues today.
Right. So, so what happens is that you have multiple agencies coming in, right? So, but there's some coordination, and that's what the primary responsibility of NICEM is, to make sure they're coordinating all of the agencies, that there's no duplicity in it, that somebody's not missing anything. And now we're in the aftermath. We're doing an investigation to determine what went wrong, certainly, and what we can learn from it so we can get that information out and correct it. And the objective, of course, is to minimize or to try to ensure as best we possibly can that this doesn't happen again with any other parking garages. So, sure.
Just on the DOB front, not only have they doing a lot of work down there over the scene, the engineering, the investigation, but the team from DOB also assisted in some pet rescues the other day. So there was a number of cats that were in a building. They went in, went in to try and locate the cats in I think it was in 55 Ann Street, which is adjacent to 57 Ann Street, which is also under full vacate order right now from DOB. Residents couldn't go into the building. The DOB staff went in, couldn't find the cats in the building at first. They figured out they escaped. They went back on Thursday afternoon, found the cats underneath the resident's bed, safely returned them to their owner. So DOB does a lot. They do the engineering. They do a lot of the contracting oversight. They do the investigations, also pet rescue. And I would say that if there are also residents that need to get into their apartments because they have a pet, because they need to get access to medication, if you're down on the scene, you can talk to some of the NYPD community affairs folks who are down there or any of the officers, and we can arrange for you to get escorted in or for somebody to go in if the building's too dangerous to help you get your stuff.
And all the agencies that are required to be there are there constantly. We stay there. They'll be there until the demolition is completed. And again, very important, we have interagency meetings run by emergency management every few hours. We had one at 10 o'clock this morning, where we had the latest updates on what's going forward with the pinning of that wall between Pace and the construction site, the collapse location. So we get updated every few hours. Again, it's coincided by emergency management.
Well, great. That was a lot of information and very useful, very helpful, very much appreciated. Okay, so we're going to turn topics now, and we are going to hear from our Department of Sanitation Commissioner, Jessica Tisch. The commissioner was recently on a podcast with the mayor, his Get Stuff Done podcast. If you haven't heard it, I would encourage you to go and check it out. And if you like it, tune into the next episode. And if you don't, then do not. But I understand, Jesse, that you said something on the podcast. I did not listen to it, but if I'm hearing correctly, you says that sanitation, if we don't do our jobs for one day, everyone in the city notices. If we don't do our jobs for 2 or 3 days, that's called a public health crisis, right? So I'm sure that the podcast is very, very interesting. And I do know that when you were appointed to the Department of Sanitation, and me and Jesse previously worked together, and I mentioned to her, I says, Jesse, why the Department of Sanitation? And she said, it's the one agency that affects every single New Yorker, and I want to make a change. And I said, interesting, I never actually thought about it quite like that. So I understand there's a couple of new things that you are now expanding into, moving into. Can you share that with us?
Sure. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Banks. The Department of Sanitation works to keep the city clean, but our 10,000 members of service also work to keep it safe, both from public health risks caused by unaddressed trash and also from quality of life concerns. At the beginning of this month, Mayor Adams entrusted our department, which has unique experience at the intersection of public space, communities, businesses, and cleanliness, with 2 new responsibilities related to public safety. The first is enforcement of the rules around street vending. Now, I want to explain that while DCWP remains the lead agency on vendor licensing and management, and DOH and SBS and other agencies provide important services and support, sanitation police officers have, for the last 3 weeks, been ensuring that sidewalks are clean and accessible, that vendors who follow the rules are protected from those who do not, and that we have an enforcement mechanism that works for vendors, for residents, and for tourists. DSNY does not enforce for the sake of enforcement. We come at this work looking for compliance around cleanliness. Specifically, we focus on illegal disposal of garbage or dirty conditions, blocking curbs, subway entrances, bus stops, sidewalks, or store entrances, oversized tables, leaving items tied up overnight, carts failing to visit commissaries, safety issues like gas generators and gas cans, and dumping grease down sewers or in the garbage. Now, vendors that keep the area clean and passable for pedestrians are not our focus. But New Yorkers have an expectation of clean streets and clear sidewalks, and that is what DSNY is helping to deliver. We've inspected areas from Kingsbridge to Times Square to Flushing and many more, posting warnings and, only when necessary, engaging in limited summonsing and confiscations. Our sanitation police officers are also empowered to engage in these confiscations and will do so if necessary after warnings have failed to address an issue. It's early, but we are seeing results as the few vendors who are persistent bad actors learn that there will be consequences and disperse from these heavily trafficked areas. Again, this protects our brick and mortar businesses, our rule-following vendors, visitors to our city, and all of us. The second quality of life issue that entered DSNY's portfolio at the beginning of this month is management of graffiti removal. Now, for 20 years, New Yorkers would call 311 to report graffiti, and responses were slowed by a bureaucratic mess involving different agencies. Mayor Adams has cut through that red tape and given us the green light to get the job done. In the first 2 weeks of this work, we were able to get over 600 sites out of the backlog. These sites are clean today, and the work will continue, organized around the same commitment to results that New Yorkers expect from the Department of Sanitation. On both of these issues, New Yorkers should expect to see continued results towards a clean, safe, and livable city. Thank you.
So, Commissioner, if I heard you correctly, going back to the first topic that you brought up was about vending. So we're educating, we're supporting the vendors who are following the laws, and enforcement will only come when all other options have been exercised. Did I hear you correctly in that?
Absolutely. We are not trying to be punitive with this enforcement. We are trying to ensure a clean, livable city, which is why we have a warnings first approach.
And I think that is very important because I certainly know in my time in law enforcement that I've heard, and sometimes correctly and sometimes maybe not so correctly, that the tool is enforcement, enforcement, enforcement. I can debate it, I can argue it, but I certainly see the point in a lot of different areas. And the mayor has made it like very clear that enforcement as the last option. So I know we had spoke a couple of weeks ago, you were reaching out, and I believe you had met with some of these organizations and these non-for-profits that support these vendors. And the message is, if you're doing it, abiding by the law, and you're respecting the community by all means, legally vend. And the ones who are illegally vending, give them the option to say, hey, it's time to pack up or clean your stuff up. And if not, then we're going to use that as last option. So I think that's really an important part for us to get out. So I thank you and I appreciate it. Our final topic for today is protecting the safety of older adults. Last but certainly not least, we say that consistently, last but not least, but this is certainly not at the least here. This is our most vulnerable population, and we need to make sure that we, in fact, are doing all we can to protect these older adults. I had a meeting about 2 or 3 weeks ago with your commissioner, right? I came to your office, right? And we had a nice long talk. And you're going to hear how, and this is the reason why we have Mark Stewart, who's the commissioner for NYPD Community Affairs, and how they are working together. The mayor has said consistently, I mean, this is during the transition, this is what he was running for office, is that these cities, we've been managing these cities the same way for years and years and years. What is the first step to actually change how we run these cities? And it's to break down the silos. Like, nobody owns anything. We all here are working together. And I think you're going to see yet another example of how two separate agencies are actually collaborating, working together, and I think it's going to produce some very valuable outcomes. So, Commissioner, talk to me. What's going on?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for the opportunity. And for those of you who do not know, the Department for the Aging is responsible for making sure that New York is an age-inclusive city. And that's one of the mandates by this mayor, sort of not only cross-collaboration, but making sure that all services are aligned to allow older adults to age with dignity and with the services and the supports that they need, and that institutionalization is the last resort. Most people want to live in their community. So we're very proud to work with the mayor on older adult abuse and victimization. Early in his administration, we were able to expand those services. And we now have programs that not only provide information and services to the older victim, but we also do so now in a stronger collaboration with the police department. One of the projects that the mayor also established was the Cabinet for Older New Yorkers, where he brought together 20 agencies to look at how to get things done and make sure that we do not have any gaps. What we would love to talk to you about today is not so much that the elder abuse crimes have been on the increase, but the nature of that crime has changed dramatically. And our responsibility is to inform the public on what the nature of that crime is and to work in close partnership with the police department. We've always had a working relationship. Now what we have is a partnership where we That's very different. What we do now is do a lot of cross-training. We train police officers so that they're better versed on what the services are for older adults. We also train officers so that they can be well aware of the issues facing older adults. And then we have community service providers, one in each borough, and with this administration, Mayor Adams increased that so that in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, where the population is growing, we have additional resources there. And they can help the older adult victim navigate all of the complexities that an older adult does to get Crime Victims Compensation Board funding. Also, they also help them get some of the legal supports that they need, and they also provide tangible items that the older person may have lost. A walker. They may change the locks if the person was with a breakery entry. And, so there's an entire treasure of information and services out there that the public is not aware of and that many older persons are not. And so the job is to make sure that they are aware of it. With the police department, we would always have an exchange of information. Right now, we work with the police department, and I have to thank Deputy Commissioner Stewart, because we have not only exchanged data on clients, but we use ComStat data to start directing how our services should be reinforced or how the direction of our opportunities. We also are working very closely with them to ensure that there is, and Mark, you might want to speak more about this. We are also working very closely with them to ensure that there is one police officer designated and trained and informed so that he or she can be a resource to their precinct and their local community around elder abuse and elder services. And if I may take a few seconds to just give some people some tips.
Oh, sure.
One of the things that we have heard is that, the nature of the crime is so different. I mean, what we have seen, and it is a clever industry, is the scam industry. We have older adults being victimized and losing personal property and assets that are sometimes limited because of scams. So we are always educating, and that's our partnership with the police department also, is educating individuals. And by going to those older adult clubs that we have throughout the city on how not to give out information and how to protect yourself against scams. The other thing that we have seen on an increase is assaults at the ATM. Again, spending a lot of time, the two agencies together, doing a lot of education across the city on helping people. What are those safety tips that you need to protect yourself and not to be vulnerable? And we're also working to look at the nature of the crime. Can we, and working with the DAs, can we change the penalty for particular crimes? Because, and I've shared this before, if you push Jessica down, and she gets hurt, the vulnerability is still there. But if you push me, who is maybe 25 years older than Jessica, the vulnerability and the impact is much stronger. I can break my hip. If I break my hip, I am prone. If I'm prone, I can get pneumonia. So the impact of that same act is very different on an older person than it is on someone who is much younger. So we're looking at those kind of impacts. But I would love for you to talk a little bit more about our partnership.
Commissioner, shoot.
Yes. Good afternoon. When I first met Commissioner Cortez, we formed a relationship, and I told her I was very committed to the older adult and what the police department, what we can do. I just didn't want it to be, we assign a precinct cop to go talk to our older adults. These people that were picked, these officers that were picked, are handpicked. We just can't go into a person's home and say, what's the facts? What happened? We have to be compassionate. We all have older adults in our family. My mother's 85, so I've seen the decline from where she was 30 years ago, 20 years or 10 years ago to where she is now. So officers that we assign to these precincts, they are handpicked. And the majority of the time, I said, listen, first, let's ask them if they want to do it, because I don't want to put an officer there that we assign. I want to know you have the passion and to be compassionate when you go to these homes and you experience a crime victim, especially an older adult. So these officers in these precincts are handpicked. We have a crime prevention unit that we will be talking about scams with the older adults, utility scams, medical scams, law enforcement scams. And what I want to do, when we get these complaints in the precincts, I want these officers to have a forum with the older adults and the siblings, because sometimes we think if we do a scam alert that the older adults, they might not get it. And if the children or the siblings or a caretaker's there, they will probably be the person that you want to contact if something's happening. So we want to do forums in every precinct. We're going to get the complaints of all of our victims, and we're going to bring them in. We're going to do scam alerts, and we're also going to teach them about crime prevention too. So we will definitely be compassionate to our older adults, and I look for a relationship to grow stronger with Commissioner Cortez.
And just, Jessica, Commissioner?
I was just going to say, the other area in terms of public safety is because this cabinet that the mayor has created of 20 agencies, many of you are sitting at this table are part of that. One of the other areas is pedestrian safety. And for us, that's an important area. And so we're working with the Department of Transportation on pedestrian safety also, which is a public safety issue because the highest number of victims has been the older adults. And that kind of work is very, very essential in creating areas in those districts that have a high percentage of older adults, creating traffic calming effects so that the older adult is safer when they're crossing the street or when cars are turning corners. So that has been another major, major collaboration, again, around public safety issues.
I mean, if we just think about it, right, if a city gauges itself on how well it's doing, how could one of the most important metrics not be how do you take care of the aging and the elderly? And so, when I went to your office, Commissioner, and oftentimes I go and we speak, and people state what the problem is. And I said, what do you do? And she said, we're going to train in the police academy, so forth and so on. We're going to get one cop in every piece. I mean, she had a whole list of exactly these are things that we need to do. So I do know that the aging community certainly has like a phenomenal advocate in you. And I got that feeling just by having that, hour-long conversation that we do have. So we certainly want to get this message out. And I think that Mark brought up like a very point that I just want to accentuate. I don't want to lose that. Oftentimes, it's the elderly who might not be able to hear the tip. And it has to be someone else. It could be the son, the daughter, the next door neighbor who can actually maybe explain that important tip to them about things that they should be doing or not doing. So we have to be very careful about that. This is just a personal comment I'm about to make now, but I'm not so sure how much lower you can get on someone who preys on the elderly. And we as a society, if we don't protect, if that's not something that we can kind of coalesce around and agree around, I don't know what else it could be. So I was very, very encouraged, very encouraged when I left your office. It's like, I'm elderly, I have an advocate for you. I certainly know Mark for a very long time, so I do know you have like a great partner. You said working relationship versus partnership. And I just think that I just feel very good that like really good things are going to come out of that today.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So listen here, I think this wraps up our topics now. Certainly in the beginning, for people who are actually just listening for the first time, if you go to hearfromeric.com, you can submit your questions. Your questions will be read, and the ones that we don't get to, right? I think we tightened that up, Sheila, right? You will receive a response because we want to make sure that if you have a question on the area that you need more information on, the administration is providing that back to you. So go to hearfromeric.com. You'll be apprised of the next week's topics so that you can prepare your questions and be prepared. And certainly thank you for tuning in or listening in once again. So Derek, I'm kicking it to you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We will now take a few on-topic questions from the media related to today's presentations. Fabian?
My questions
is for the DOB. Mr. Esposito, before you mentioned there were 47 or 50 SUVs on the roof at the time of the collapse. Do you know what the capacity was for that garage? And subsequently, how many other building garages are there within the 5 boroughs, and what's the DOB's plans going forward with inspections now that this tragedy occurred?
With relation to 57 Ann, there were 40-some odd SUVs on the roof. They were in their certificate of occupancy, they were allowed to have 5 or more vehicles on that roof. And it could actually hold more than 40, some, it could actually hold 50-some odd. So it was justified in having those up there. Now, that's a rule that's put in place back in the 50s. I think that the SUVs were probably pretty similar in weight to the cars from the 50s, because those 50s cars were all heavy metal, a lot of plastic in the cars right now. And the second part of your question?
How many building garages, indoor garages, are there scattered throughout the 5 boroughs? And in light of this tragedy, what's the DOB's plans going forward to inspect these garages? Is that what you guys are doing?
We have over 4,000 locations where people park their vehicles. You're talking about parking garage, you're talking about locations under buildings for the owner.
Inside, where the cars are parked in the building or on top of the building?
The number is 4,000.
And are you guys going to do anything going forward in terms of inspections now that this has happened?
As a result of this event, we've went out and did a sweep of all the garages that this company oversees. We swept those locations. That was completed yesterday, and nothing has been found that would cause us to evacuate or vacate any of those buildings.
How many other buildings does this company oversee, other parking garages?
It's around 17.
Also, the folks from DOB, I visited a couple garages in Lower Manhattan today with open DOB violations, and I know that Mayor Adams had said that this was going to be an immediate start to an investigation to make sure this doesn't happen elsewhere, not just how it happened at 57 Ann Street. So how soon, especially in Lower Manhattan with lots of open buildings, how soon can the public and garage attendants as well know for certain that the structures they're working in are safe?
Well, first thing is that, and I just really want to go back because I think it was a very interesting question. The investigation hasn't revealed yet that the 47 SUVs caused the collapse, right? But in general investigations, as Joe Esposito said earlier and Commissioner Isco, is that they're meeting every few hours. So as investigations go, anything that comes up that indicates that it could be the immediate concern to the danger of anybody is dispatched. So we don't wait until the end of the investigation. So if anything that's coming up that determines we should be looking at this, we should be looking at that. We're actually dispatched. I met with Deputy Mayor Joshi yesterday. We had a conversation about that. She was actually going into another meeting concerning that. So as that data comes out, it's actually farmed out to the appropriate agencies to ensure that we are doing all we can to keep New Yorkers safe. And I don't know if anybody else wants to tag on to that.
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify that current code required owners of the garages submit to us an engineer's report once per each 6 years. And this particular garage was cited to be submitted report by the end of this year.
If there is a garage with open violations now that there's an investigation, as Mayor Adams has said, to make sure this doesn't happen at other garages, even if they have until the end of the year, is there a plan to change some sort of, make some sort of action to make sure that structures, even if they do have until the end of the year, are safe for cars that they may not be able to handle?
Obviously, it's our routine actions to follow up on violations, especially on violations with classified as hazardous class 1, which kind of was riskiest one. And we follow up, we do inspection within 60 days. As I said, it's the owner's responsibility to maintain the building, do periodic inspection with the professionals, and make sure that the structure is maintained in state of good repair.
But if you're asking that, are we looking at all of the buildings with violations? And because I just want to make sure that he's understanding your question.
It's a new investigation, even if the city council law is in effect that they have a certain amount of time to get an outside engineer to come look. I'm wondering if the investigation is going to change your urgency to make sure that these garages have the ability to withstand the weight of the cars in today's day.
Absolutely, and that's something that we spoke with Deputy Mayor Joshi about, who's the Deputy Mayor of Operations. So the answer is absolutely, and that's what I guess I was trying to articulate it, is that when information like that comes out, immediately we're dispatched to take a look at it. So even though you may have to another 2 years, we certainly will be taking that into consideration and seeing how do we make sure that we get inspections in, or to make sure that we minimize that. But the first thing I want to be clear is that the investigation hasn't determined yet that any of the violations that were open caused this, hasn't happened yet, or in fact, were they overloaded vehicles? We haven't come to that as of yet.
One more for anyone, if I may, who wants to tackle this. We spoke with one of the attendants who was there at the garage at 57 Ann Street today, who said that he and the other attendees had concerns about the structure of the building, as did the deceased Willis Moore. And I'm curious, for any of these employees who are, clocking in 8-hour days, don't feel like they're in a position of power, what can they do in their day-to-day life to tell somebody, hey, I don't know anything about Department of Buildings or code or whatever, but this may be unsafe? Who can they talk to?
The first most responsible actions will be to call 311 immediately. And I just want to say to everyone, if you see something, observe something, we treat each complaint with respect, and we send it to inspector basically to all complaints. And if someone observe deficiency in the structure or in the building they're working, they immediately should notify us through 311, each complaint being triaged in order of priority and being inspected as well.
Thank you. Earlier this week, the administration reached out to New Yorkers, asking them to submit questions for the officials that have joined us here today. We will now get to as many of those as we can with the amount of time that we have left. Our first question comes from Catherine in Manhattan. This is for Department of Buildings and NYSEM. With the garage collapsing in Manhattan, should the people that work near the vicinity be concerned about air quality?
Air quality?
Yes.
Air quality, yeah.
Well, we're testing the air on a regular basis, and as of right now, we have seen no indication of any hazardous material in the air.
Yeah, so when we talk about the interagency process, one of the agencies that's represented is DEP. They do a lot of work down there, and one of the things that they do is air quality monitoring, and there have been no concerns with the air quality down there.
Our next question comes from Octavia from Queens for the Department of Sanitation. She asks, given the city's ongoing rat problem, can you explain the restriction on the size of garbage containers that can be put out?
Yes. The new rules that went into effect on April 1st changed the set-out time for trash from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., but understanding that people may need more flexibility, we have said that New Yorkers can set out their trash at 6 p.m. in a container, 55 gallons or less, with a sealed lid. The reason why we came up with 55 gallons or less is that is the size of a container that our sanitation workers can lift. And so we have to remember that we have people coming around collecting the trash, collecting these containers and getting the contents out of them into the back of a truck. And that size was the right size for them to be able to lift.
Our next question comes from Shakir in Brooklyn, who asks, as a Muslim community member, I am really concerned about the safety of mosques. What does the NYPD do to keep houses of worship safe?
That was a question based on the topics today? Okay. You want to tackle that, Morgan? Yeah.
Community Affairs, I'm in charge of the clergy unit. And just 2 weeks ago, I started a clergy unit. And that means we have 3 community affairs officers in each borough. And their job is to go to the house of worships and inform them if any threats, any intel that we might have on the police department, and have our community affairs officers go to mosques, synagogues, whatever house of worship it is, that they'll be informed.
And also, that question here is that during these holy days of the NYPD, they put out a lot of extra coverage to go around to make sure that these houses of worships are being secured. And, there's a whole intelligence apparatus that takes place in the city, and that they're listening and they're looking on social media, they're hearing a lot of tips that come in, they get investigated. So there's a lot of backdoor things that are happening to keep the city safe, especially during a religious, very holy day. So be rest assured that they are working very diligently in that area.
Next question comes from Nathaniel from the Bronx for Deputy Mayor Banks. It says, can you explain the difference between purchasing robotic dogs that can be vandalized by criminals versus hiring more police officers?
I don't accept the question. I don't. We get that a lot. And the question is that it have to be either or, right? Technology is something that we as a society has to embrace. And I reject the notion that it's either or. So when you have these, and I think it was robotic dogs, all right, just take the situation yesterday that took place, or 2 days ago at Ann Street. The FDNY could have sent in, right, their fire officers, and the building could have collapsed on them. Or they could have sent in a robot with a camera on it, right? Think about it. So, I think people are getting caught up in these quote-unquote dogs. The question is they're cameras, and you can send them into a location to take a look and be able to prepare yourself for a potential incident. So if you want to bring it down to the NYPD, there's a person, or allegedly there's a person inside, he has a firearm. Or do we send police officers in where they have to engage, or do we send a camera in that's just encased in quote-unquote a digital dog? We want to make it a cat, we can order a cat. But it's a camera that goes in, that takes a look. And now it gives the people outside the ability to say, what do we need to do to negate this particular situation as peaceful and harmless to all involved? So I think that we need to change the narrative at that particular part of what it is. It's technology, it's coming, and we have to be able to use it responsibly and very fair and equitable to be able to continue our safety in the city.
Arlene from Manhattan's question is for the Department of Building. She asks, 33 Beekman, which is the building next to the garage collapse, was evacuated from floors 1 through 4. Is the rest of the building safe?
Repeat that question
Yeah,
again?
can you repeat the address too?
33 Beekman, the building next to the garage collapse, was evacuated initially, floors 1 through 4. Is the rest of the building safe?
We did structural inspections of all the buildings surrounding that whole block, and we only vacated the areas that we thought had structural stability issues. So if there wasn't a vacate on there, we didn't see any structural stabilities with the rest of the building.
Next question comes from Donald in Brooklyn. This is for both the NYPD and potentially aging. I'm 65 and walk a lot, and there are a lot of e-bikes on all of our sidewalks, which is scary for older New Yorkers. What is being done to address this problem?
Well, there's a crime prevention unit to this that we're putting out as far as reflectors to wear. Make sure that you look both ways when you cross the street. We know it is a problem with all these e-bikes and these bikes going across. But we just tell people just to be mindful that, so much traffic is going north to south and east and west, just to look out and be careful. But at this point now, we are doing, the NYPD is cracking down on a lot of these illegal bikes. So hopefully that will cut the problem down.
And the actions that we do have, right, it's actually monitored through a form called Traffic Stat. And when that data reveals that this is on an increase, certainly, and if it's pocketed in certain areas, extra resources are put into that area to do education and certainly do enforcement if necessary. So, and that's why it's very important for people to communicate as best they can through the 311 system, as it is important for the city to make sure that we stay pretty much in tune to the data that we're getting from the 311 system. That is your way to communicate in non-emergency situations, because that's useful data there. So if we're starting to see here from you that there's some issues that you're sensing in this particular area, then we can deploy more resources in there to do education and certainly to be able to come out with a strategy to do it. So that particular individual, I want to get back to the individual, find out exactly specifically what areas and what times that they're hearing, so we could actually dedicate some resources there.
And I wanted to just add to that, that as part of the pedestrian safety, the Department of Transportation is beginning walking tours with older adults through our network of service agencies to look at exactly what those issues are so that we can give that data to the Department of NYPD as well as Department of Transportation to see what mitigation strategies are necessary. So we're doing walking tours around the city to look at pedestrian safety issues that impact older persons. By that person should contact us, just as Deputy Mayor Banks said, and they can call 311 or they can call Aging Connect at 212-244-6469, and we can hone in on what that neighborhood is.
Great. And our final question comes from Aglaya in Manhattan for Deputy Mayor Banks and the whole dais. What can we, as residents of the city, do on an individual level to help police keep our neighborhoods safe?
There's a lot of people on this dais who work for the police department, and I'll let any one of them take the first crack at it. I mean, because I can speak on that for a very long time. But I'm going to say to Joe Esposito, right? You take the first crack at that. Okay, I'm going to kick it to Mark Stewart to take.
What was the question? What can the people do to help the police keep the city safe? Don't commit crime. I'll start there. Don't commit any crime. Be the eyes and ears of your neighborhood. If you see something, say something. It's been a slogan that we put out since 9/11. We react the best when we get good, positive information. And that's what we rely on the public to give us. Good information. Listen to the tips that the police department gives out about how to stay safe, lighting, things of that nature, how to park your car. So listen to what the PD tells you. They're the experts on how to stay safe. If you listen to them, you'll stay safe. But again, we rely on information from the public. So please, don't be afraid to give us that information.
If I could, I'd add a couple programs that Chief Esposito really helped build under his tenure at New York City Emergency Management. I think you're the longest serving commissioner of New York City Emergency Management and the longest serving chief of department.
Well, longest serving chief of department.
We couldn't get rid of him.
Joe
Bruno beat me on emergency management. Yeah.
Well, his name, is if a name could be hallowed ground in a building, his name is hallowed ground in New York City Emergency Management. A couple of the programs that he really helped build and expand that I encourage New Yorkers to take advantage of. One is our CERT program. You can volunteer with New York City Emergency Management. Often our CERT volunteers end up getting deployed alongside the NYPD for different events and activations. And then also signing up for Notify NYC, which is our public messaging system. We now have over 1 million subscribers. It's available in 14 languages, including American Sign Language. But if you are prepared, if you have the information you need, likely means that you will be able to take care of yourself and your family. You won't need a first responder to rescue you or help you. And you will also be able to keep your loved ones safe. So 2 things that you can do through emergency management: CERT and Notify NYC. Thank you.
I just add to that. He brought a very good point. Thank you for reminding me. CERT, those are people from the neighborhood that have a concern for their neighborhood, and they join and they volunteer. Very similar to the auxiliary police program in the NYPD. So if you want to get involved, that's the way to get involved. The CERT program, your auxiliary, get involved with your precinct community council, your community board. There's so many ways where you can get your opinions and your advice out to us, the agencies that can help you. So I advise you get as involved as possible. CERT is a great, great program. And again, it's the civilian part of what we would call the auxiliary police program from the NYPD.
Take a crack at this too. This is a partnership between the police department and our communities. The commanding officers in the precincts, they all have town meetings. You could come to the town meeting. You're in the community. You know what's going on in the community. You know people that's hanging out in streets that shouldn't be there. You know people who are riding bikes in the neighborhood that shouldn't be there. The precinct is open 24/7. You could go in at any time and speak to an officer, commanding officer, and let them know any activity that's going on in your neighborhood that you don't seem is right, that the police department should know about. The whole process to this is communication. Communication is a big part of policing, and we have the doors open 24/7. So I think communication sums it all.
That concludes today's briefing. On behalf of the Adams administration, I would like to thank everyone for tuning in to today's briefing. We will look forward to seeing you all at our next one. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.